It was founded in 2014. It's a global network of industry professionals, entrepreneurs, investors, researchers, students, and more who meet regularly in local chapters and just support the technological advancement of the construction process. All that means is we basically hang out about once a month. It's totally free for anyone to join and be on the distribution list. You show up as you can. It's typically after work for about an hour and a half. The first half hour is really just getting settled, talking to people, meeting new people, catching up with your friends. And then we typically do a bit of a presentation or a showcase on something that's been going on in your local community that's driving innovation forward with construction. That's really it about the group. Again, it's totally free. If you're interested in being on the distribution list, we'll send something out after this so that you can. And if you'd rather opt out, no problem either. But it's a really good opportunity just to bring like-minded people together who typically would not be speaking with each other or otherwise having an opportunity to meet and just driving construction and innovation forward. With that, you guys, we can kind of shift over to what you guys all came here for, and enough of me talking here. But for the past 6+ weeks, many of us have been ordered by the state or by our respective states into isolation in the interest of limiting our exposure to the spread of this unpredictably deadly virus. By limiting our exposure, though, we have also limited our access to job sites, to offices, and to each other. And we're communicating more digitally now than ever. Business and people alike, as a result, are left to adjust to new times to stay afloat. And construction companies, engineers, architects, tech firms, they've all been on the front lines with first responders and joining together to help those affected by COVID-19. These same folks are now being called in as experts to help city agencies rewrite the rule books and create new governance is required to return people back to work safely. Think about it. It's in times like these with disaster that actually in the past and even now we have an opportunity to collaborate and come together and drive technology to the next level to adjust what will be new, never seen before times. With that, I'll hand things off to our panel host and one of the co-chairmen of the SCS in New York, Matt Diesner from Autodesk. He's going to jump in the panel. You're going to hear from some of the top construction executives in the city and what their experiences have been and how they and their companies are handling these new times.
Yeah, thank you, Blake. That was a great introduction. Welcome, everyone. Really excited to have you all here. I've been a member of this group for 2 years. I've gotten a lot out of it, so I hope you will too. With that, I'm going to introduce or allow the panelists to introduce themselves, but I just want to say I'm very excited about this panel. We have senior leaders from 3 very well-known and well-regarded contracting firms, obviously here in New York, but they're also well-known globally as well. You all, I'm sure, know them. So with that, I would like them to introduce themselves. Anita, maybe you can start. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Skanska, and then we'll go to Jim and then Terry.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt, and thanks for having me. Hi, everyone from New York. I'm not in the city today. I'm in upstate New York, where it's probably going to thunder or rain or something. I think we're all waiting for the storm. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Skanska's building operations here in the U.S. I work with our leadership team to understand our markets and think about the future. So my job is to think about the long-term health and resiliency and sustainability of our organization. For me, that includes a lot of long-term business planning efforts, working internally with our teams to align on strategic initiatives, and then thinking about externally and working with our clients, working with our partners, as well as oversight of our strategy, innovation, business development, and marketing teams. Before I joined Skanska last year, although it feels like I've been there forever, I was with AECOM in various roles for more than 15 years. I wore a lot of hats, starting in marketing and field and business operations, and ultimately working in M&A and strategy for the construction group at AECOM Tishman. So, Skanska's one of the largest firms in the US with a big New York presence. We've got revenue of over, I think, $7 billion in 2019. We're in 28 metro areas, and we have sort of 16 building regions. So you could say that we're seeing all the variations of how all of this is impacting construction every day. So excited to be here and excited for our conversation. Thanks, Matt.
Welcome, Anita. Jim.
So Jim Barrett, Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer with Turner. I'll start actually with noting that the picture you had of me reminds me that there's, I think there's, you know, the freshman 15, gained 15 pounds freshman year. I think there's a quarantine 15. So maybe for me, it might be a quarantine 25 actually. But it's, you know, this has affected me in a lot of different ways. But I appreciate you having me here. It's great. So I started with Turner probably, I think almost 30 years ago. I have had various roles, running some divisions, some offices. I think a milestone for me was probably about 10 years ago when BIM was being introduced into the industry. I just jumped in, took control of that effort, rolled it out nationally to the point where pretty much every project, probably over 20 million, is using the technology for various purposes. Then we were introducing lean practices from taking from like Toyota and manufacturing. I oversaw that effort. And then because of just the nature of what we do and what I've been doing, we finally decided we were going to put together an innovation department, which really was going to lead change within the company. I think our goal is to try to look at a portfolio of innovations where you're looking at the short term, things that we can make a difference right now, midterm, that's probably 2-3 years out, and then also a long term that's 10 to 15. So that we're sort of always keeping ahead and trying to leverage changes in the industry. And this is one of those times when we're bringing everything we have to bear to try to help the company figure out what that future and that new normal looks like.
Great, welcome, Jim. Terry.
Hi, everyone. Terry Robbins here. I'm the SVP CIO of Structure Tone, which has recently evolved into the SDO Building Group with a series of mergers over the last 18 months that has pretty much doubled our revenue and geographies. We have offices throughout the United States, Canada, London, and Ireland. My role here is I oversee all information technology for the organization. I'm also the co-chair of our 3 centers of excellence and innovation that focuses on bringing improvements through innovation and best practices throughout operations, estimating, and our client relations. I've been with Structure Tone 13 years, and prior to that, I was the CIO of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Excited to have you here. And Terry, I want to keep it with you as we jump into the meat of this of the content here. Blake gave a very interesting and I think prescient overview of the challenges that we have as a society, but also, you know, particularly within construction. So before we jump into the technology aspect of it, I'd love to hear from your perspective. What are you seeing out there? What's been the impact of the business? What are your thoughts there? And we can jump into it.
So the impact of our business has been somewhat similar to the impact to most businesses across the world. We're probably down 60% of our business capacity from where we were sitting here in probably around March 15th. So it's been a quick downturn for us in terms of our engagement on projects. The change in being able to be beyond projects was a difficult one in some ways, but an easy one in others for a myriad of reasons. Obviously, the health of folks became paramount to all our decision making, and ultimately with our business partners, clients, it became realistic that moving away from our projects while this all sorted out to some degree where we could make it safer for everybody became our priority. So with that, we've been spending a lot of time planning our return and how to do it in the most safe and productive manner for our employees, our business partners, and our clients.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think safety is becoming more and more front and center. I mean, it was always important in the industry, but more so, I think, after all of this. Jim and Anita, do you have anything to add to that, or what's your perspective on kind of the current state of things in construction and the impact to the business?
I think we, you know, I would say similar to what Terry said. There's varying degrees of temporary suspension. We're working with various jurisdictions and clients, and that changes by city, by state. So managing that is happening. But I think what Terry said about safety is sort of the utmost importance, and we're doubling down on what we're already sort of an industry-leading safety approach. But you know, this is something that any risk analysis really has this in, you know, a different setting, different thing that we're dealing with. But I think necessity is driving the adoption of virtual collaboration. I think we're seeing new heroes emerge, which is really exciting for construction, whether it's, you know, folks on site or some of our technology rock stars that are coming up with great ways for people to jump in, whether it's virtually or otherwise. And really, I think, you know, we've talked about this a lot lately, is sort of the rise of corporate empathy. We're paying attention to, you know, I'm seeing all of you are in your homes, right? For the most part, there's a couple, I think Terry's in his office, a couple of us are in home offices. I'm seeing people, you know, people's kids, people's dogs, people's birds, all kinds of variations, where I think there's a huge human element that's going to change the way we think about each other. And I think that will ultimately drive further adoption of really important care for life practices across the industry. So I think that it's a positive, but it's definitely a tough and unprecedented time on the day-to-day for sure.
So
Yeah,
I'll say I'm wondering, you know, there's tremendous uncertainty around where we are, where we're going. I'm wondering if that is what it feels like to go through a paradigm shift. That's what's happening right now. Is this? There's a fundamental. You know, you look at the economic, the social, almost and the physiological. You know, all our assumptions about our world are changing. They're being challenged. The question for us, I think, as a company, is you know, not try to avoid being reactive. You know, there'll be new government regulations and requirements, but to take this time actually to think about not just the need for change, not how we need to change, but how we should change, where we want to go as a company. What does this all mean? Is this in fact, again, a paradigm shift? How do we leverage that? What does the new or next normal look like? So we're actually taking this time as a company to sort of reflect on that. We're getting, you know, most of our projects, truthfully, probably 700, 800 were active. There's probably 200 to 300 that slowed down considerably, but it doesn't matter. Right? We're looking at a paradigm that we're going to apply to all projects, just new ways of thinking, new ways of working, and fundamentally changing how we work. I think that's where it's going for us.
yeah, without a doubt. And I think that we're already in the midst of a paradigm shift. Where that will take us, that's, I think, a good question. And you know, I want to ask about, you know, what business priorities have been changing. We talked in our call earlier this week about, for example, different, you know, moving to 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, that type of thing. What kind of things are you having to shift around from a business perspective? And then I think that's a good segue into the technology, how we're going to support those changes. Jim, do you want to take that? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I'll jump in. I guess so. We're looking at work very differently. We obviously have to think about creating safe environments for workers, but also smaller numbers of workers. We're fundamentally looking at how we manage labor, how we sequence the work. Again, this idea that we're thinking about is that we may adopt across many of our projects is this idea of sequencing. You know, going to 24-hour shifts. Where it's like three shifts, and having smaller amounts of workers doing smaller amounts of work, which actually not for nothing, is actually a good lean practice. This idea of small batches and flow. So actually, again, we're sort of constrained, but in the constraint becomes an opportunity to innovate, to think differently, right? And actually, I'm a believer that again, those constraints actually will drive innovation. So what's happening to us is we're just fundamentally re-looking at how we look at the work, how we manage our labor, and it's great because we're having to drill down into unbelievable amounts of detail because we've got to think about sort of small numbers of people, 6 foot distance, what's happening in that area. So it's challenging, but it's also raising an awareness about the actual components of work and how we're going to put those together in a very different way.
Yeah. And Terry, the changing business practices that Jim was just referring to, I think there's probably some trade-offs from a tech perspective on how that's been supported. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, Matt. First, I want to echo, what Jim was saying in the sense, and I had some time to spend recently with some distinguished retired generals from the Army through a Thayer group that we're partners with, and they taught us about a term called VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which is what I think we're facing as a society and certainly as an industry. To Jim's point, things are changing dynamically. We have people in the field that are being creative and inventive in terms of how they approach this, because they, by nature, our field personnel are very innovative thinkers. How they get around challenges and projects, just by nature, that's part of their DNA. So, we're seeing new technology that people are exploring at a project level as on a need basis. We're seeing startup companies that were focused on one set of functionality, recognizing that their delivery model could be applied to these requirements that are evolving, and they're shifting their development rapidly in that manner, which I think puts pressure on all of us, the executives, certainly in technology roles and innovation roles, to weigh in on, hey, are our investments that we've made already scalable and adaptable to these new requirements and easier to implement through our workforce? Or do we pivot and bring in a new technology because it addresses a need that has never been realized before, and something that we need to get to the field so they can be more effective, efficient, and safe and collaborative than they had to in the past. So I see that paradigm coming about, and I think I've had to kind of discuss with my own staff that we've had to kind of change our habits and how we view new technology now, and kind of be more receptive to trying new things without as much rigor as we have traditionally.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think that speaks to how is technology and innovation bubbled up to management. And Anita, do you want to comment a little bit about how, for example, if someone that in a junior role or a mid-manager role has an idea or they see a technology, what's that like? What's the corporate philosophy around evaluation there, and how that stuff gets put into practice or tested out?
I mean, there is not a better time to raise your hand than now. I think construction, somewhat deservedly and somewhat, I think, undeservedly, has a reputation for being an industry that's behind on adoption of technology or new practices, right? If it's worked for 100 years, why do we have to change it? If we built that big tower down at the tip that way, why do we have to build it differently, right? And I think it started to change. I think that there was momentum kind of coming into this decade around a lot of shifts, and I think a lot of organizations were getting smarter about selecting core systems and knowing very quickly how to integrate new tech. I think we're all at different points on that journey, but we're somewhere on it. But we're having to rapidly deploy things. So when we had a call really early on in this COVID experience where we pretty much brought anybody who's touching innovation, whether they're from the IT world or they're in a VDC role or even in, you know, our marketing teams who are touching different things, basically saying, all right, what do we have that we can deploy quickly that can solve this problem or that problem or can help with this safety issue? So we're openly asking people for their ideas, and I'm starting to see not only you know, our younger, more junior folks feel empowered to raise their hand and make a suggestion, but also I'm seeing people who traditionally didn't like to ask for directions raise their hand and ask for directions when they know someone in another city has already gone through what they're going through. And that's a big change. That's something you don't see in this industry, right? We're all happy to help, but we really struggle to ask for help. And I'm starting to see that, and that is what gets me really excited. I'll say even I'm happy that I work for a company where our general counsel was the one that gave us all a presentation last month or earlier this month around the bubonic plague and that epidemic contributing to really what became the Renaissance and the Reformation and all these changes that impact even how we do this type of work today. The birth of architecture and real architecture. And that really starts to come from people feeling empowered, people feeling excited. And I think because we're all on equal playing field, we're all on a grid in a video conference, or we're all just facing the same challenge, we have sort of this moment to really capitalize on it. And I think what companies can do and what we're trying to do is give people opportunities to flex some of these ideas out. And if we pilot it on one project, we're connecting people across the country on similar projects so that we can better test whether it's social distancing tracking and tracing, using software that was originally meant for our reality capture software is a great example. So that's how we're getting executives who would never get on a training for a reality capture walkthrough can't get to a site, or our clients can't get to a site. So they're all happy to jump on it. So if you can use that same tool to solve another problem that we're all facing right now, people are excited to test it out. So now is the time. I keep saying that to folks. I'm like, please raise your hand. And my inbox is getting full as a result. So are a lot of my colleagues, which we're really excited about because I'm not going to solve all the problems. I'm going to empower people to do it. And I think, Jim and Terry are probably in similar positions where we want to hear what people want to do to solve these things.
So, hey, Matt, if I could chime in on that, just to give a different perspective on how we're trying to organize ourselves in this time. So we're fortunate, and I'm thankful by coincidence, we did some work last year putting some new structures and programs in place that are actually working very well for us. So we started a program called the Innovation Challenge, where we actually got leadership to pick business problems to work on. We then organized and picked people from around the country to get workshops and solve those problems and come up with innovative solutions and then deploy those. So we had that in place last year, and we're actually starting to leverage that now to solve problems around COVID. The other thing we put in place last year, which has proven to be very, very useful, is a group called the Innovation Champions. So we have representatives from every geographic area and function in the company, probably 20, 25 people, who are our connection and network out to the company so that we can hear about, like Anita saying, all the activity, people are trying things, which is great, but we're trying to get visibility into that and then try to support that more. So we have this network now with the Innovation Champions. And then we just put something in place that's proving to be pretty valuable, which is, we call it, it's a program called the Innovation Town Hall Tuesday. So every other Tuesday, we have a webinar inside the company, and we highlight projects that are doing something to overcome the challenges that we're facing right now. And then we also combine that with an external speaker that talks about that same topic, but maybe 3 to 5 years out. So and so it's becoming this channel for people a place to go where they can hear about what's going on, share, and then and then recognize people that are doing really interesting things so that we incentivize the rest of the company. So we're sort of fortunate, actually. We put a series of sort of structures and processes in place last year, but we're adapting them now to this new environment so that we can focus on, okay, what is that next normal, the new normal, whatever you want to call it. And now we've got the structure and processes in place.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I think COVID has been a catalyst for that that trend, and as more people see the need for that, collaboration, that remote collaboration, there, it's going to get to a tipping point where I think almost everyone's going to want to do it. Terry, I want to bring you in just as far as adoption goes, which in my experience, selling software in construction has been really key, and I know. StructureTone has been great about getting, mobile devices in the hands of most of their staff. What is your philosophy around adoption, and what are some of the challenges? I know we talked earlier this week about, on-site during work hours. It's great, but maybe there's some challenges around, after hours, or when there's a necessity to do it off the job site versus on the job site. So if you want to add a couple of things there, that'd be great.
Well, I would say that we probably have the same adoption challenges that most of the construction industry has. Much, as Anita said, there's been a belief or a history of the construction industry being behind innovation and thus adoption. We've put in solutions as it relates to the field, usually based on the fact that it was championed by the field. And we find that when we have something that's been brought up through one of our innovation mechanisms, much like Anita and Jim's organizations have, that we get a lot better traction in terms of adoption in field solutions when the idea comes up. We go through proof of concepts. And then we do piloting across our business units. We don't force something upon a project. A lot of our projects are variable because of the nature of our company. So we have interior projects that are very small. We have large core and shell projects. We have everything in between. So we try to guide people into the best solutions based on their peer review. And then we try to build up momentum around that to the point where we feel like we have something that has proven efficacy throughout the enterprise. And then we try to make sure that there's standards and training and support for those platforms. One of the platforms that you're familiar with, Matt, was something that took that journey, and that was PlanGrid back in the day. That's our model. It's successful many times, but we've gone through some challenges where something's come about and we've had a reverse course on it. But I'd say it's more right than wrong.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, getting buy-in from the field, there's no substitute for that. So I agree with you. Now, I'd love to ask all of the panelists a two-part question that I think a lot of folks in the audience are going to be interested in, and that is, first, what types of construction tech are you, or design tech, or any type of prop tech are you looking at currently? And then what system or software, whatever, did you have in place before this quarantine that you are very glad that you have? And Anita, I know you talked about the virtual collaboration piece and how important that was. So maybe if you want to lead us off.
Yeah, so listen, I think, I don't know the date, somebody gave me the date yesterday, but we signed our enterprise agreement with StructureTone right before a lot of the social distancing measures were legally put in place. Boy, are we glad we did. We can leverage that tool not only to allow for virtual collaboration, but that's going to support us in our efforts around, in the future, productivity tracking. It's going to help us with obviously executive site tours, client site tours, and I've never, ever, ever had so much legal, risk management, and financial support for a use of technology than I've seen since we put that together. I think the other big opportunity that's out there, and we're sort of, it's something we're looking at and testing. It's not necessarily something we've rolled out everywhere, different types of wearables, and how some of this trace software can help us with sort of the future of what Restart's going to look like, what the next generation of builders are going to be used to every day, and how we maintain social distancing when we need to and keep people safe, not only in the event of a pandemic or a virus like this, but also just in general, right? So we're able to track all kinds of things, and initially we were pushing certain initiatives with virtual collaboration and reality capture around housekeeping, and now we're talking about much bigger things, and that will help, I think, in the long term as we think about companies like SmartVid and AI and what we can do there. So I'm really grateful that we got that over the hump, but we had also had it. We had Struction Site, I think, in a couple of our offices for over a year. So not only did we sign this agreement in March, but we had people capable to roll it out. The only challenge we're seeing, and I don't know if we talked about this when we chatted as a group earlier this week, is the procurement of 360 cameras. They're going from last year's model to this year's model, and everybody's looking for them right now. So there's definitely some supply chain challenges that are going to be out there that we'll still be facing. It's toilet paper and 360 cameras keeping me up at night.
Yeah, you said it. Jim, do you want to talk about some of the tech that you've been looking at lately as an organization?
We're trying to tackle this problem of the proximity measuring and monitoring, which is a hard one. So we sent out actually an RFP nationally probably 3 or 4 weeks ago to a whole bunch of different companies where ones we've worked with, some large, some small, large like Sprint, like literally Sprint, who had some wearables, and some other companies. And trying to tackle this sort of the ideal, which is, can you measure that distance between 2 workers? If it gets less than 2 meters for some duration, each of the workers gets notified, and then we have also capturing contact tracing, because the feeling is that obviously we're not all just when the switch gets flipped, we're not all just flooding the site with workers. We're going to have to do this in a very graduated way. The government is going to require certain proof of social distancing and contact tracing. So we're trying to use technology, see if we can find something. The challenge is that most of the solutions were built for another purpose, and they're now trying to adapt to this one, which is a hard one. And oddly enough, though it's a simple thing to want to just measure the distance between 2 people, it turns out that's a very hard thing to tackle. So we're trying to get and testing various technologies on multiple job sites to hopefully find something that then, if we have some confidence in, will help us tell our clients, yes, we can maintain distances, we can do contact tracing, and hopefully those clients start to say, okay, you can bring back workers. So we're focused on the technology, but with the ultimate goal of getting our people back to work, because it's a real struggle right now, and people's livelihoods are in the balance. But we're also being careful about that technology, because we're doing a sort of rigorous process to go through and test it, because we don't want to deploy something and say it works, but it doesn't, and people get infected, blah, blah, blah. So we're trying to balance that. We want to move quickly, but we want to move responsibly as well.
Yeah, 100%. That's important. The balance there. Terry, do you want to talk a little bit about what StructureTone's doing as far as tech? Yep.
Sure, I'll take your second first and just reverse the order. I mean, what I'm glad we had in place was we were a highly mobile environment in terms of our hardware platforms, between laptops, iPads, iPhones. So 95% of our organization already had those types of devices. So I'll have to admit, they probably didn't use them to the extent that they are using them today, specifically from home. So we had quite a number of help desk calls where we were troubleshooting people trying to figure out how to connect to their own home Wi-Fi network if their children weren't around at the time. And then our collaboration tools. We've been leveraging GoToMeeting for quite some time, but it's the adoption just went viral in our organization. So those are the things that we had in place that really scaled quickly and helped us transition to a remote workforce. The things that we're looking at, what Anita and Jim say, I think is really right where we are right now. And so I'm going to kind of think about looking out a little farther than that. And I think, monitoring the workforce on sites and such is very important right now. But I'm more intrigued by the idea that, the construction industry has been projecting a reduction in available workforce around skilled labor for coming up for the future. And now I'm wondering that, the need to de-densify the workplace is not going to accelerate things like robotics and autonomous vehicles and that technology. And that's where I'm kind of saying, okay, here and now we understand some of the parameters and some of the technology, but I think the answer to this real long term is going to be less humans maybe at job sites, and that's going to need to really be a sea change and really require some cutting edge technology to be introduced. I mean, there are examples out there, and I think it's just going to become more and more prevalent, and the use case is going to explode.
Yeah, so I want to reinforce Terry's message. I think again, that when you talk about that paradigm shift, I think we're seeing that possibly what we'll start doing. We already had movement towards multi-trade prefab modularization. I think this is going to be accelerated dramatically. I think the paradigm is going to shift where in the past the job site was the hub, and you had some spokes off of that of suppliers, but everything essentially was engineered, fabricated, assembled, installed on that site. I think we're talking about now a distributed network where we have smaller nodes where you're doing off-site prefab, off-site modularization. You're bringing the things only when needed. You're in a controlled environment so that you control the health and wellness of the people in that production environment. And then the knowledge workers get distributed as well. So the idea of a project team may change. We may have very fluid definition. People all over the world could contribute to a project, and now we're going more virtual. But I think Terry's spot on about this idea that this is I think the job site itself, I think, is going to change. It has to change how we define that and what we do there.
Yeah.
I think just to sorry, Matt.
Please go.
Just to jump in on that, I think the way that we've been able to embrace the virtual workforce is definitely going to allow us to tap into like the change in what a job site looks like. I used to say all the time, you can't take a job site home with you, but maybe somebody can. Some people can, right? That's going to really shift things. And I think as such, when you think about modularization and prefab and some offsite work, we're also going to really need to desperately and quickly get a better handle on our supply chain and where things are coming from. I think we all faced very quickly a harsh reality, even if we were trying to get mobile devices when all this happened, right? Because of where things were coming from the beginning. And I think that's not just facing construction, that's any manufacturing or industrial market in the US right now is facing that challenge. And so as we look at our supply chain and as we look at how we expect people to show up and when we expect them to show up physically, is going to change. And I think that's going to enable us to attract a more diverse workforce, because we're going to be able to tap into not just the traditional engineering graduates or traditional construction and architecture graduates in this market, but folks that are coming not out of a college program, because I think higher ed is going to get significantly impacted by this whole thing. So where we're pulling people from is going to change. How we're doing it. And when we're talking about our professional workforce, I started seeing sort of seeds of this last year. I mean, I met with some people in our San Francisco office, and I asked them what they studied in school, and 3 of them were psychology majors, and they were crushing it as assistant PMs. So what I'm really excited about is how we're going to expect not just different behaviors and different methods of how we work and how we deliver and what we deliver, but also who we're asking to do the work. So I think that is going to enable us to tap into a bigger market of people than we've traditionally done as an organization and as an industry.
And again, to Anita's point, here's another opportunity for technology. So one of the things we're working with IBM on blockchain for supply chain visibility and transparency. You know, again, we need to control our supply chain far more than we have in the past. So again, opportunity for new technologies. Blockchain may be an answer for that. When in the past trying to introduce blockchain would have been you would have huge resistance. Now maybe there's an opportunity that's been created.
Yeah, a lot of things to digest there, and I find this idea of the new job site very interesting. De-densification was a term that was used. I'd like to go to a question from the audience to that point, and it seems like we have several folks from the robotics industry, and they ask, can any of you share some insights on robotics in the future of construction? Will this pandemic help speed the effort? So maybe Anita, who mentioned Boston Dynamics on our previous call, has a few thoughts on that.
Can Spot take my temperature yet? Is my question. I think the challenge there is going to be identifying very specifically where we want to use robotics and how we want to do it. I think it's going to the safest, easiest bet is definitely in the modular and prefabrication space or in the reality capture space. I'm really curious about what those firms have been looking at coming out of all of this, because I think it could be in the health environment area of it. So I think there's definitely appetite, but it's going to still face, I think, the same level of scrutiny and review that anything is going to face. But I think, like anything, we're all a little more open-minded than we might have been 90 days ago. So I'm excited to see what comes out of this. But it's probably the one area where I'm cautiously optimistic, as opposed to, all over it optimistic as it relates to construction tech. But I do think that de-densifying and the labor force we're already kind of going to be forcing the hand of robotics coming in. But I'm curious about how they can be deployed in the health environment, particularly in live or working sites that are adjacent to healthcare or research facilities. So I think that is where there's going to be real need. And I know we're seeing that in pockets, and we're seeing that with some of our most highly technologically savvy clients, but I think it's got to really hit on a larger scale to catch wind in the day-to-day construction environment.
Sure, yeah, it has to, along that adoption curve, it has to get to a point where I think it's beyond the proof of concept before it's widely adopted. I agree with that. We have a supply chain question. I'm going to read it from the audience. As we get back to work, how do job sites stay in sync as the supply chain stretches multiple states and nations? If the steel mill in Canada is closed, but the job site in New York City is open, how can a general contractor project manager accurately keep their clients informed with realistic timeframes and accurate cost projections? So, Terry, you want to take a crack at it?
Well, I'm not sure it's going to be perfect, but us, we're multinational, multi-geography organization. We have a lot of resources with their ears to the ground in a lot of different geographies, and we formed several task forces in light of C-19, and one of them is a supply chain management task force, and it's really about networking, our best and brightest that are constantly, working with the supply chain groups to understand, what's available. We are now, doing cross inventory across our business units that we would never have done before C19. A business unit, a project, they really manage their material management within the scope of their organization. We're now communicating, broadly across organization about what we're seeing and how can we help each other and how can we redirect possible supplies or materials based on critical path, regardless of what business unit or project is involved. So we're trying to do that, with our own within our own network.
Yeah, Matt, this is another one. You sort of, this is the here and now, of course. But if you look at the future, if you think about how we currently operate, what Terry described, right? A person picks up a phone and calls another person at a supplier or manufacturer, says, "Hey, do you have the thing I need?" Like, it's almost an archaic way of going about this, right? And we hope and trust that that person's honest and tells you the truth, and that then their process actually backs that up. Like, again, this is where we look at it and say, when we're going into the future, can we get more visibility into that supply chain? Could you be using, again, RFID tags to be tagging all materials as they're going through fabrication and delivery? Is there a way to get better visibility into that versus I pick up a phone, I call somebody, or I have to get on a plane, travel to Italy and check something out? I mean, there's got to be better ways, and I think this is, again, challenging us to think about better ways to manage that supply chain.
Anita, are you, you're on mute if you want to jump in.
Sorry. We already had a strategic supply chain group, so we have relationships with sort of our most ubiquitous vendors on a regular basis. And so we, as this pandemic started to take shape, we started doing weekly report outs on where we were seeing shortages, either with those firms that we're already in informal relationships with, or with providers that are really holding us up in certain areas. However, I think that's one part of it. That's the relationship part of it. There's the blockchain part of it, whether we use RFID, whether we do all of that, but it's always going to be a combination of relationships and information. And I think one of the things we started to see was, just even if we're talking about quality management, is tapping into resources. If you're a multinational firm or you have partners with a multinational presence, tapping into those resources, whether they're in China and Italy and India, to see, you can do your quality checks by embracing sort of virtual collaborative tools. That's the other piece of this. It used to be, I'm going to call you up and then I'm going to fly over there. Whereas now, I think we have the right technology where, I can see the steel being fabricated when somebody takes me in there. So I think it's always going to be a combination of technology and relationships when it comes to the supply chain, particularly when we get into the finishing areas. But from the steel perspective, I think there's definitely going to continue to be a challenge as we are all working with different jurisdictions. And so if everything in the US is going one way and Canada is going another, it's going to just be one of those things that we've got to manage. There's not a technology that's going to solve that for us. But I think all three of us have benefited from the fact that we're in large organizations where our teams in one place are supporting our teams in another, to give insight and information so that we understand how we can share with our owners that we might have a steel situation, right? And that's the biggest piece of this is having consistent information, and people communicating about it in a productive way. And I think I'm seeing more and more of that. Even though we have things in place, we're seeing adoption of those communication practices, which is still critical.
Yeah, that's so true, and there's a lot to digest there. Big hot button issue, the supply chain, especially considering COVID and everything. We have a question for Jim around prefab. The question is, can you please give us more insight into some of the prefab you've done in healthcare projects around the city? And I guess maybe we could even talk about, I believe there was a temp hospital on Long Island also. So if there's maybe a follow-on question there about how that was turned around, would be great.
So in healthcare, it's actually, we've been adopting different practices around prefab and modular for a while. Actually, it really started outside of New York City and then brought in, with multiple projects that are doing the, bathroom pods, the head walls, prefabricated head walls, prefabricated corridor racks. We're trying to push as much as we can to look at work as assemblies and components that we can take off site, control the fabrication assembly, move construction to a production process, almost like a controlled, predictable manufacturing process. It's hard though. There's resistance. There's challenges with designing this multi-trade prefab or modularization into the job, designing it properly, coordinating it with other systems. There's challenges with unions, doing some of that work off site. There's no doubt there's some resistance, but we see, truthfully, we have a whole group. Actually, one of our innovation challenges a year and a half ago was around the topic of prefab modulars. We have a whole group with executive sponsors. Our growing belief is that this is the future of the industry, that we're gonna have to move to this. So we've got people in place that are evaluating it. We're gathering information around the company, and we're considering things like, do we buy a company? Do we start our own manufacturing warehouse environment? We're thinking about the big picture. We think this is actually, with the issues with the trades, the skilled trades leaving the industry and not being replenished. This issue again now with COVID, where we want to have people work in a more controlled environment. When we move that to a production process, we can tap into a whole different workforce. You get more. You can be in areas where you can bring more women in, where it's safer, more comfortable environment. You can tap into a whole new pool of labor. So we think this is the future of the industry. Actually, we're quite focused on that.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. I have another question, unless Terry wanted to comment on that previous piece.
Okay.
Okay. So here's a question from somebody, I guess, a vendor in the industry, and he asks, better visibility, new tech will initially cost more money because seeing efficiency savings. Are owners and CMs going to consider hiring GCs and subs with this new tech, even if they're more expensive? And how is that value proposition evaluated when it comes to tech and the cost? So who wants to take that one? Go ahead, Terry.
I don't know about my my co-speakers here, but I've not heard of a client yet that used technology as or as a differentiator specifically other than over cost. I don't see where we're going to get into a situation where we'll say, client, we're more expensive, but our technology is better. I think we're more efficient and less costly because our technology may be better. So I'm not seeing it the same way. I think we all are dealing with the landscape of typical business margins in the construction industry. I think it's unfortunately, especially from the history of the financial crisis of 2011, and now what we may see at the outside as we come out of C-19 is unfortunately it was a race to the bottom in many ways for our industry, and we're hoping that doesn't reoccur, but I don't see it being an opportunity for us to charge our clients more.
Right. I probably agree there. I think if you can expedite speed to market, if you can expedite turnover of facilities so that you have clients who can treat patients or cure diseases or educate people or give people homes, then they are willing to pay for whatever that takes. So whether it's, so long as it's safe and high quality and cost effective, right? So it's always about that dance between quality and cost and schedule. You may be able to get in the door with some cool things, but it always has to tie to value, always.
Yeah, I'll reinforce that again. We think the same way. Anita's that's a great comment. You know, our mantra is purposeful innovation. You know, you're doing something to solve a business problem. You're not there to say that there's not people just playing with things if they're cool would be a lie. There clearly are, but as much as we can, we try to manage that and make sure that when people come up and they say, "Look, I got this cool thing," we say, "Okay, fine. Prove to us that it solved the problem better than anything else we've got, what value it delivered." And when you can prove that, then it becomes a business decision whether to invest in that solution. If you say, I can save X amount of time, I can save this cost, then a good business person, you know, a general manager or even a project executive on job will, you know, they'll say, fine, I'll pay for it if I see that it's going to solve the problem and deliver new value. We usually don't, you know, we try not to again just play with things for the fun of it. And when you prove that value, you can again make that case to an owner and say, look, this is essentially means and methods. This is how I'm going to do business. It's just the way it is. I remember the early days of BIM. We had a lot of resistance when we put a new person on a project, and people would get, you know, the owner would challenge it, and we'd say, look, this is just how we're going to do business. And so, you know, it's our means and methods is to use this technology. So I think as long as we can be careful about really testing things, proving out their value, I don't think there's really an issue with going back to an owner and saying, here, this is what value it's adding. And the owners have been great in terms of willingness to adopt new things.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have about 5 minutes left before we're going to go to our breakout room. So I thought we'd end on a positive note, and we have one last question about getting folks back to work, because I know a lot of people in this industry clearly very anxious about when that's going to happen and what the process is going to be. Jim, you mentioned earlier, you know, the importance of being cautious and making sure that we're safely getting folks back to the job. So what is the strategy? What is the thought process? And what are some of the companies doing to get there? I'll leave it open for whoever wants to answer it.
We've put in a whole suite of new protocols with technology behind them to ensure, you know, safe distancing as the workforce approaches the project, to ensure that we're keeping in mind, you know, understanding where people might have been if they've been in contact with people. We've been deploying a lot of different PPE and ensuring that you know, we've always been safety conscious, and you know, PPE has always been integral to that. It's just going to be you know, a little different in terms of the applicability of it in different manners. So you know, I'm sure that Anita's, Jim's organizations, we're all thinking safety first. We're thinking split shifts. We're thinking de-densify, monitoring, reporting. You know, so we're all, I think, in the various stages of evaluation and lessons learned, and trying to apply what we learn.
Yeah. Anyone, Anita, you have something to add?
Yeah, I think everything that Terry said is spot on, and what we're trying to do is where we've gone back to work first. We're learning lessons on that to establish sort of what the right checklists are, what the right safety protocols are. So a lot of the safety protocols we put in place for work that hasn't stopped is where we're learning quite a bit on how to restart. And we're not just thinking about all of the actions on site, but where we might continue to have temporary suspensions in place, how we can facilitate ongoing collaboration, and also thinking in terms of our offices and opening those up and making it safe for everyone to be back at work. So there's a couple of different approaches. I think the other aspect of this is, we're changing how we work, but we might be changing what we're building, right? So the certain projects that are underway that are far along are going to look the same as they were going to look from the beginning of COVID. But I think there is quite a lot of chatter out there about how design might change in some of these facilities as a result. And so how are we going to anticipate that is a longer term view. So there's the basics of sharing knowledge, getting people consistently back to work in an appropriate way, and having practices and protocols in place. But then there's a longer term thinking of what is this going to mean for our active projects or active pursuits or projects that are coming down the pipeline now that are going to change in their makeup. What's that hospital going to look like in a year versus what it was going to look like if we drew it 3 months ago?
Yeah. Jim, final word if you like.
Ditto.
Perfect. So thanks everyone on the panel. We really appreciate you being here. Personally, this was an honor and a pleasure to moderate, and we hope you'll come back soon. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Blake. He'll wrap us up, and then we'll get to the breakout rooms.